After the success of SN15, SpaceX is moving towards the next step with the SN16 launch. The SN16 prototype is the successor of SN15, and the launch is expected to be carried out in the next few days. Though no official date has been announced by the SpaceX team yet. SpaceX flew the SN15 prototype on 5th of May, and this was the first ever Starship test flight by SpaceX, which did not result in an explosion. The SN15 was the first ever prototype that resulted in a smooth landing. All the previous test flights either exploded upon landing or soon afterwards. Therefore, celebrating the success of SN16, SpaceX has collected a lot of invaluable data from this flight, and this has enabled them to make improvements in the future test flights. Even though the SN15 test flight has been declared a success due to its normal landing, still a few minor issues have been observed within this launch. First one being the damage of SN15's landing legs that resulted due to a hard collision with the landing side. SpaceX is in the process of figuring out the possible causes of such damage and the ways to avoid it in the future test flights. Therefore, improvements have been made in the SN16's landing legs, and hopefully the SpaceX will be able to overcome this issue in the upcoming test flights. The SN15 flight flew to about 6 miles, but with the upcoming SN16 launch, SpaceX is aiming for twice the altitude of SN16. And it is expected to reach an altitude of 20 kilometers and reach twice as high into the sky. This approach of SpaceX to increase the altitude with each successive flight is a key feature of the company's rocket development strategy. Instead of attempting to fly a new prototype straight into the orbit, it takes the approach of aiming for a lower altitude at the initial tests. After collecting and analyzing the data with such flights, it makes small improvements in the prototype and gradually increases the altitude with each subsequent flight. We've seen a similar strategy with the Grasshopper when SpaceX was in the process of developing its Falcon 9 rocket. SpaceX takes this step-by-step approach because the objective not only includes successfully launching the rockets, but also to land these rockets safely in order to achieve the key reusability objective. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has stated it multiple times that full and rapid reusability is the single most important breakthrough needed in order to make humans a space-faring civilization. And Mr. Musk is totally right. One of the main reasons why we still don't have any permanent presence on the Moon or Mars is because there have been any major breakthroughs in the space industry ever since Apollo missions, and that's why going into space has been insanely expensive feat. But with the inception of SpaceX and many other private companies like Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, the cost of going into the space has gone down exponentially over the past decade. Seeing the private companies competing on the cost and innovation fronts, NASA has also partnered with private companies to take cargo and astronauts into the orbit. And over the past few years, SpaceX has emerged to be one of NASA's strongest partners. Though the construction and assembly of SN16 had been started long before the SN15 test flight, but certain improvements have been made in the SN16 prototype, and some key structures have been modified based on the data collected from the SN15 launch. Besides SN16, SpaceX has begun the process of stacking what could become the first Super Heavy booster capable of supporting orbital Starship test flights. SpaceX is building the first prototype of the giant Super Heavy rocket booster that will propel Starship to orbit at Starbase, located in Boca Chica Beach, Texas. The rocket will be the world's most powerful rocket, equipped with 28 methane-fueled Raptor engines that will generate over 60 million pounds of thrust upon liftoff. That's over twice the thrust of the Saturn V rocket that launched NASA's Apollo missions to the lunar surface. SpaceX plans to catch the Super Heavy rocket after it launches Starship to orbit. Catching the 230-foot tall, 70-meter booster as it descends from space will enable fast reusability. Starship booster, largest flying object ever designed, will be caught out of the sky by launch tower. Big step forward, as reflight can be done in under an hour, SpaceX founder Elon Musk said on April 7th. Using the launch tower to catch the rocket saves mass and cost of legs, enables immediate repositioning of booster onto the launch mount, he stated. SpaceX is already building Starship's orbital launch tower ahead of a potential test flight to orbit this summer. Musk previously said that the launch tower will feature an arm that will catch Super Heavy, with load points just below the grid fins, and shock absorption is built into tower arms. Since tower is ground side, it can use a lot more mass to arrest booster downward momentum, Musk explained. The company has not released an official render of how the booster will be caught. The orbital launch tower is under construction as teams simultaneously build the next Starship prototypes that will soar into Boca Chica Beach's sky. Starship SN16 is at the launch pad undergoing inspection for a potential second flight. Starship SN16 and SN17 are under assembly at the Starbase rocket factory down the road. Local Boca Chica residents report seeing sections of Starship SN20 and booster BN3 under assembly, which is expected to be the first Starship test launch vehicle that will fly to space. I am highly confident that we will have reached orbit many times with Starship before 2023, and that it will be safe enough for human transport by 2023. It's looking very promising, Musk said earlier this year. In the meantime, a number of upgrades have also been made in the SN16 prototype to minimize the potential problems faced by the earlier test flights. Here are some of the upgrades that have been made based on the data collected from the earlier Starship test flights. Number 1. Upgrade in landing legs. Since the SN15 landing legs were slightly crushed upon landing, the SpaceX team came to the conclusion that the current legs being used for the test flights need certain improvements. Otherwise, the same problem might persist in the future test flights. Therefore, the SpaceX team proceeded to solve this issue and has made slight alterations in the landing legs of SN16 prototype. It's not yet clear whether or not this alteration will solve the problem, but SpaceX team is hopeful that the upcoming launch of SN16 will overcome this issue. Number 2. Heat shield tiles replacement. The heat shield is a necessary component for a rocket that protects it from the sheer heat faced by the rocket as the rocket re-enters the atmosphere. SpaceX conducted an experiment by placing few heat shield tiles in the SN15 prototype to see how it would react to the atmospheric pressure. Surprisingly, after the test flight, we saw that some of the tiles have been slightly damaged and some have been totally destroyed. Therefore, SpaceX analyzed the data from the earlier SN15 flight and has applied this knowledge to improve the heat shield system in the SN16 prototype. And we're hoping that the tiles won't break in the upcoming launch and SN16 will succeed the heat shield test. Number 3. Starlink Connection System. SpaceX placed a Starlink ground receiver on the earlier SN15 test flight to test its functionality during the flight. The onboard sensors collected data. The post-flight press release of SpaceX stated that the Starlink system successfully worked during the test flight. This is another major breakthrough achievement for SpaceX, as this successful test means that SpaceX might be able to land its Starlink internet to all commercial plane flights in the coming years. SpaceX will also heavily rely on Starlink's internet accessibility during its Moon and Mars missions. The fast internet connectivity will enable these space flights to have instant connection with mission control, therefore resulting in better experience throughout the journey. Starlink is a satellite internet constellation being constructed by SpaceX that'll provide satellite internet access to both cities as well as hard-to-reach areas not covered by the mainstream internet companies. The constellation will consist of thousands of mass-produced small satellites in low Earth orbit, which communicate with designated ground receivers. One of such receivers was placed in the SN15 flight to measure its usability in the atmosphere. Over 1,000 people have already been using the beta version of Starlink internet services, and more people are being added every day. It is not yet clear when will SpaceX's next test flight will be. But one thing is for sure, that SpaceX is making continuous improvements in the SN prototype, and soon we might be able to see a fully functional Starship rocket capable of taking people to low Earth orbit and beyond. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel to stay updated towards the future Starship launches. Until next time, bye for now.